the pre-dawn quiet of May 28, 2024, in Manaus, the sprawling capital of Brazil's Amazonas state, a few of Djidja Cardoso's family members were driving toward her home. A deep-seated worry was gnawing at them. For over a full day, Djidja had been completely silent, not responding to a single one of their messages or calls. Anxious, and with a growing sense of dread, her relatives knew they couldn't simply sit by and hope she was okay. At about 6 a.m., their car pulled up to her house, located in a quiet residential area. From the outside, behind the locked gates, an eerie stillness hung in the air. They called out and knocked on the door, but the silence from within was their only answer. Realizing they had to take matters into their own hands, they found a way inside. The door was opened by Djidja's brother, Adomar Faras. He looked completely on edge, his eyes darting nervously. Inside, they also found Djidja's mother, Djidja Cardoso, and several employees from Djidja's successful chain of beauty salons. When the concerned family members stepped into the bedroom where Djidja was, they froze in place. There she was, lying motionless in her bed, tucked neatly under a blanket. When they demanded to know what was going on, the answers they received were frustratingly vague and evasive. "She's just resting," they were told. "It's all part of a spiritual process." But no matter what they said, one thing was painfully, gut-wrenchingly clear. Djidja wasn't breathing. She wasn't alive. Overwhelmed by shock and grief, her relatives immediately called for emergency services. When investigators arrived on the scene, it only took them the first few hours of examining the room and Djidja's condition to realize that something was terribly wrong. Serious suspicions started to bubble to the surface. Despite showing obvious signs of being in a critical medical state, no one had ever made the call to take Djidja to a hospital. Her family would later reveal that in the days leading up to her death, she had been completely bedridden. She was so incapacitated that she had to wear adult care products. Her body was severely swollen, and she struggled to put together even a few short words. That morning marked the official start of a criminal investigation into what had happened to Djidja. It was an inquiry that would slowly peel back the layers of a deeply troubling series of events that led to this tragedy. But in that awful moment, standing in a quiet bedroom with Djidja's lifeless body, surrounded by a strange, chilling emotional disconnect from the people who were supposed to be caring for her, her loved ones had only one burning question: what in the world really happened here? Djidja Cardoso, whose given name was Dilimar Cardoso Carlos da Silva, was born and raised in Manaus, in the heart of the Brazilian state of Amazonas. She first stepped into the public spotlight through her captivating role in the traditional Boi Bumbá festival. There, she performed as the Sinhazinha da Fazenda, the cherished central female figure of the Garantido team. This festival isn't just a celebration, it's a deeply woven part of the region's cultural fabric, and its main performers are often elevated to local celebrity status. Djidja was beloved by audiences, admired for her incredible charisma, and a profound respect she showed for local traditions. On stage, she radiated a powerful confidence and an undeniable presence. After her time with the festival came to an end, Djidja pivoted her ambitions toward the world of entrepreneurship, diving headfirst into the beauty industry. She successfully launched a chain of beauty salons in her hometown of Manaus and quickly built a formidable reputation as a savvy and successful businesswoman. The fame she had gained from the festival certainly helped draw in an initial wave of clients, and her very active social media presence worked to amplify her brand's reach even further. She consistently posted promotional content and personal updates that revolved around beauty treatments, wellness routines, and the importance of self-care. The lifestyle and appearance she projected online were presented as the direct results of her own fierce determination, unwavering discipline, and a commitment to constant self-improvement. To her friends, her clients, and her thousands of followers, Djidja was seen as a modern-day role model, a woman who had successfully built a thriving business from the ground up, all while doing something she was passionate about. And yet, almost nothing was known about her personal life. She maintained a strict separation between her family and her business world, carefully curating an image that was professional, perfectly polished, and in many ways, quite enigmatic. The family dynamic was complicated. According to those who knew them well, the relationships between Djidja, her mother Djidja Cardoso, and her brother Adumar Faras were, until recently, described as fairly neutral and almost entirely businesslike. Djidja would sometimes make an appearance in Djidja's social media posts, while Adumar preferred to stay completely out of the public eye. On the surface, there was no sign of conflict within the family. They all lived together in the same house, and from an outsider's perspective, everything seemed to be in perfect order. Before the year 2023, there were no known run-ins with the law or any public concerns about Djidja's mental well-being. Neither her friends nor the staff at her salons had ever come forward to report any troubling behavior or hint at potential dependencies. On the contrary, Djidja always came across as someone who was laser-focused on her career. The success of her salon brand was heavily dependent on her personal image. The professionalism she projected built trust with her clientele, which, in turn, fueled the growth of her business. However, in conversations that took place much later, some relatives would admit that no one could have ever imagined that the disturbing events unfolding within that household would one day become the focus of a major criminal investigation. On the night before Djidja's body was discovered, several people were present inside her home. Her mother, Djidja, her brother, Adumar, her former partner, Bruno, and several staff members from her beauty salon chain were all there. The atmosphere was reportedly tense and incredibly disconnected. Djidja herself appeared physically frail and diminished, while the general mood in the house felt bizarrely detached from the grim reality of the situation. Parts of what transpired that fateful night were actually recorded on video by Bruno Roberto. The first clip was filmed at 11:40 p.m. on May 27th. In the shaky footage, Djidja can be seen holding a bottle of ketamine in one hand and a syringe in the other. Bruno's voice can be heard off-camera, asking her to put everything down and not to take another dose. Djidja doesn't respond. Her facial expressions and slow, deliberate movements strongly suggest she was already under the heavy influence of a psychoactive substance. The next recording was made about 30 minutes later. Djidja is now lying in bed, fumbling around as she searches for the syringe cap. Bruno speaks to her again, this time with a clear tone of frustration in his voice, urging her to stop what she's doing and get some rest. He claims he's trying to help her, but that she simply doesn't want to stop. Djidja's muffled reply is that she's planning to take another dose. In the background of these recordings, the other people in the house appear strangely detached and completely unresponsive to the unfolding crisis. Bruno's behavior in these clips leaves a very mixed impression. While his words seem to suggest concern for Djidja's well-being, his actions show a disturbing passivity. He never makes a physical attempt to intervene. Instead, he just keeps recording, as if his primary role is to document the moment rather than to react to a life-threatening emergency. That night, Djidja reportedly made several strange remarks about taking a journey or leaving for another plane. This type of language directly reflected the family's strange belief system, one that held that the drug ketamine could be used to open gateways to alternate realities. Even as the physical signs of a severe overdose became impossible to ignore, this delusion persisted. Not her mother, not her brother, not Bruno, and not a single one of the salon staff members present ever thought to call for medical help. The next morning, Bruno told others that he had found Djidja unresponsive. Still in the house at that time were Djidja, Adumar, and at least 2 members of the salon staff. It would later be confirmed by the coroner that Djidja had likely passed away at around 2 a.m. But even as her body grew cold, none of the people present reached out for professional medical assistance. Instead, They continued with what can only be described as a deeply misguided spiritual ritual, willfully ignoring every single sign that Djidja was in desperate need of urgent medical care. According to the family's bizarre account, Djidja hadn't actually died. They claimed she had simply, temporarily, left her body, insisting it was all part of a spiritual practice they were engaged in. They truly believed that she would awaken on her own within 4 hours. When that didn't happen, they carried her body outside and laid her in the sunlight, convinced that the morning rays would somehow bring her soul back. She was later carried back indoors. These actions created a disturbing false reality, all while the clinical signs clearly showed that her condition was irreversible. The videos recorded by Bruno would later become a central piece of evidence in the police investigation. These clips captured the crucial, terrifying final moments. Moments when things could have, and should have, turned out very differently. Djidja Cardoso's passing wasn't a sudden, unexpected event. It was the tragic and inevitable result of profound inaction and a collective, chilling refusal to accept reality. That night marked the turning point in what would become a criminal case that sparked public outrage, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because of the complete and utter absence of basic human responsibility from every single person who was around her. A month before Djidja Cardoso's death, some of her relatives had become so worried that they contacted law enforcement, claiming she was being held inside her home against her will. On April 24, 2024, officers from the Manaus Civil Police responded to the call. The concern was focused on Djidja's rapidly declining physical condition and the family's repeated refusal to allow even close family members to enter the house. By that point, Djidja had stopped answering her phone, hadn't been seen leaving the house in a long time, and according to these relatives, was no longer able to walk on her own. When the officers arrived, they were greeted by Klusimer, Djidja's mother. She calmly insisted that Djidja was perfectly fine and didn't need any help. When one of the officers asked to see Djidja's room, they were met with a locked door. Body cam footage from the scene captured a tense exchange between Klusimer and one of the officers. She adamantly insisted that her daughter was not being held captive and claimed the officers had no legal grounds to enter the room without a warrant. The recording cuts off just as one officer approaches the locked door where Djidja was believed to be. What happened next wasn't officially documented, but the outcome was painfully clear. No further action was taken. According to the family inside the house, Djidja spoke briefly with the officers through the door and declined their offer to leave. However, it remains entirely unclear what her physical and mental condition was during that supposed conversation. But her concerned relatives didn't give up. They created a WhatsApp group chat they named Salvema Djidja, or Saving Djidja. The group included family members and a few others who had previously noticed deeply worrying changes in her behavior. Their one goal was to find a way to get Djidja out of that house and into a clinic for an emergency detox, but the plan was never carried out. The relatives were afraid of the potential legal consequences of a forced intervention. Klusimer held her ground, refusing all help, and the police felt they didn't have the legal tools they needed to intervene against her wishes. Any previous attempts to help Djidja had also failed, met each time with a wall of silence and denial. The house had become a fortress. From a legal standpoint, the situation appeared to be a frustrating stalemate. An adult woman was living in her own home, seemingly by her own choice, had not reported any mistreatment herself, and wasn't officially asking for help. On paper, there was no clear violation that would justify a forced entry. This episode exposed the serious, and in this case fatal, flaws in the system's response. Even with clear, visible signs of severe dependency, mental instability, and extreme physical deterioration, official procedures seemed to outweigh basic logic and human compassion. Her loved ones were left completely powerless, forced to watch from the outside as she wasted away. April 24th would be the last documented visit by law enforcement to Djidja's home. None of the people who were desperately trying to help her took any further legal steps. No one contacted the district attorney's office or tried calling for emergency medical services again. Djidja never managed to escape the toxic, closed loop she was trapped in. A month later, she passed away, never having received the help she so clearly and desperately needed. The failed attempt to rescue Djidja Cardoso revealed just how helpless even the closest friends and family can be when they are faced with a rigid, unfeeling system. Even in a situation where a person's life was so clearly at risk, the law remained blind to the harsh realities of substance dependency. The police followed their protocol, and in the cold, tragic balance between regulation and human detachment, the life of a determined, vibrant young woman came to a tragic end. After the investigation officially began, the police made a shocking discovery. The Cardoso household in Manaus was operating as the base for a loosely structured group with all the characteristics of a cult. It called itself Pai Mãe Vida, which translates from Portuguese to Father, Mother, Life. The name appeared in the group's rituals and was used in symbols, including tattoos worn by some of its members. Behind this name was a bizarre pseudo-religious belief system that combined elements of mysticism, distorted spiritual practices, and the complete normalization of psychoactive substance use. This ideology was primarily promoted by Djidja's brother, Adomar Faras. According to authorities, he had been introduced to similar concepts years earlier while undergoing treatment for substance dependency in the United Kingdom. After he returned to Brazil, he began to push the idea of a spiritual transition that he claimed could be attained through the ritualistic use of mind-altering substances. His mother, Djidja Cardoso, eventually joined him in this belief and quickly assumed control over everything that took place inside the home and within their so-called community. Djidja emerged as the dominant, central figure. She was the one who decided who would take the substances and when. She claimed to possess a unique ability to restore a person's energy through what she called light sessions. These strange rituals took place both at the family home and, disturbingly, in the back rooms of what had once been Djidja Cardoso's thriving beauty salons. Attendees at these rituals included staff members from the salons who were slowly but surely drawn into what the group described as essential spiritual practices. The group used its own distinctive style of language, borrowing and twisting religious terminology, altering quotes from a series of books known as Cartas de Cristo, Christ's Letters, and inventing their own purification formulas. During searches of the property, law enforcement discovered vials of ketamine, piles of used syringes and needles, and handwritten notebooks containing instructions for soul restoration. These findings pointed to a level of organization and intent that went far beyond what was previously assumed. The group had a very strict internal hierarchy. Djidja made all the final decisions. Her son, Adomar, acted as the interpreter of spiritual messages and led many of the separate sessions. Djidja, despite her visibly declining health, remained deeply involved. On paper, it may have looked like she was participating voluntarily, but her dire physical and mental condition strongly suggested that she was no longer capable of making her own choices. Ketamine played a highly structured role in the group's operations. It was administered in carefully measured doses using insulin syringes, which indicated that there was some basic medical knowledge among the participants. The substance itself was sourced from veterinary clinics, where it could be obtained without a medical prescription. Authorities later confirmed that these acquisitions were made on a routine basis. One of the most notable aspects of the group was its intense isolation. Members severely restricted any access from the outside world, denied entry to concerned relatives, and tightly controlled any flow of information that went beyond their own inner circle. Any visitors who were allowed in were expected to follow strict energy rules. Those who disagreed with their beliefs or questioned their practices were labeled as spiritually underdeveloped and were quickly excluded. Dissent was simply not tolerated. This was, effectively, a sophisticated system of psychological control, operating behind the facade of a normal family and a successful business. It had its own set of rules, its own hierarchy, its own rituals, its own substance protocols, and a dangerous belief structure that cleverly disguised severe drug dependency as a form of spiritual enlightenment. This pseudo-spiritual setup became the grim backdrop against which Djidja's life, and possibly the lives of others, completely unraveled. But how did a family ever get to this point? The initial use of psychoactive substances in the Cardoso household had very little to do with any spiritual beliefs. According to relatives, it all started with a simple desire to change their physical appearance. Djidja and her brother Adamar had become convinced that they had gained excess weight and were determined to transform their bodies as quickly as possible. This obsession led them to connect with a man named Athos Sila, who presented himself as a professional personal trainer. It was later discovered that he held no official license or any verifiable qualifications in fitness or health coaching. According to the investigation, Athos was the one who first introduced the family to injectable anabolic substances, often referred to casually as bombas or bombs. He personally administered the injections to them, explaining how to use the substances and what dosages to apply. Both Djidja and Adamar began to participate in these sessions. Eventually, their mother, Closimar, joined the routine as well. The regular use of these performance-enhancing drugs soon became a daily habit for them. None of the family members were under any kind of medical supervision. The substances were not officially prescribed or regulated in any way. According to their relatives, this was the point when the family took its first fateful step toward the regular use of prohibited and dangerous substances. At first, the anabolic enhancers weren't seen as particularly dangerous. They were simply viewed as a convenient shortcut to achieving a desired body image. Over time, any sense of caution they might have had completely faded away, while their willingness to experiment with new things grew stronger. It wasn't long before Adamar began promoting ketamine as something he believed could be used to expand one's consciousness. Having already become accustomed to using injectable enhancers, it was a disturbingly short leap for him to move from performance-enhancing substances to a new, mind-altering chemical. He introduced ketamine to Djidja, who, according to investigators, was already under his considerable influence at the time. Before long, she too became deeply involved. Closimar, who had already been a part of the earlier experimentation with steroids, joined in without any hesitation. The substance quickly became an integral part of their daily routine. Initially, the ketamine was taken in microdoses in its liquid form. Later, a family acquaintance claimed that the drug's effects could be intensified by administering it through subcutaneous injections using insulin syringes. From that point on, their usage became much more structured and systematic. The home was soon stocked with vials of the drug and other necessary supplies. By then, Djidja and her family were administering the substance to themselves, on a set schedule, in a controlled and ritualistic setting. The injections were performed in a specific sequence, with each dose supposedly tied to a particular purpose. Rituals began to form around these drug sessions, involving close associates of the family and even some of the salon staff. What was once a medical and veterinary anesthetic was now entering the household through completely unofficial channels. At one point, there was even talk among the group of opening their own veterinary clinic as a way to legitimize their access to the drug. This idea was reportedly discussed by Adamar, Closimar, and others. Later on, staff from an operating veterinary clinic in the city were named in the investigation. It was through this facility, according to authorities, that the family was able to source the substance. As regular use of the drug became the norm, the entire dynamic inside the family shifted dramatically. All major decisions were made in an increasingly insular and isolated environment, and any attempt to intervene from the outside was viewed as a direct threat. Their daily routines, their conversations, and their long-term goals began to revolve entirely around the substance. People who had once lived socially active and vibrant lives were now completely absorbed in a destructive lifestyle that was dictated by drug dependency. all of it masked as some form of spiritual or ideological growth. What began as a seemingly harmless desire to improve their physical appearance had progressed through dangerous anabolic experiments and ultimately culminated in the frequent ritualistic use of ketamine. Each person became involved gradually, but with each passing day, their involvement deepened. Chemistry became a daily fixture in their lives, and their focus shifted from trying to control the body to the dangerous illusion of controlling the mind. Disturbingly, this wasn't the first time the family's twisted rituals had ended in tragedy. In the summer of 2023, about a year before Djidja's death, 82-year-old Maria Vanina, Djidja Cardoso's mother and Djidja's grandmother, passed away in the city of Parintins, in the state of Amazonas. Her death occurred during the city's traditional Boi festival. At the time, Djidja, Adomar, and Djidja were all in town for the festival, staying at Maria's home. The elderly woman had been in a fragile condition for quite some time, with old age, chronic health conditions, and prolonged emotional distress, all taking a significant toll on her well-being. At the time of the tragedy, only those 3 people were in the house with her. Other relatives who had previously lived with Maria Vanina were reportedly asked to leave the home so that they wouldn't interfere with a healing ritual that Djidja intended to perform in a small private setting. During this ritual, the elderly woman was given injectable substances that had been previously used within the family. Preliminary findings from the investigation suggest that these were the same anabolic compounds that had been introduced to the family earlier. The procedure was presented as a method to restore life energy. The participants genuinely believed that the combination of these substances, with specific spiritual actions, could improve a person's condition or even lead to a full recovery. However, during the session, Maria Vanina lost consciousness. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. No medical help was ever called. Everything unfolded behind closed doors, with no doctors or outside witnesses present. According to relatives who were later interviewed by the police, Djidja claimed that she had the ability to bring her mother back to life through intense prayer and spiritual focus. Even after the burial, Djidja insisted that her mother's return was still possible, allegedly through the act of invoking higher powers. These bizarre claims deeply concerned other family members, but at that time, there were no formal grounds for any legal action. The death had been officially recorded as natural. This event marked the first known fatal episode connected to the group. It was during this time that the core elements of what would later become the Pai Mãe Vida group began to fully emerge within this small insular circle. Djidja took on a definitive leadership role. Her word became final, not just in spiritual matters, but in decisions that directly affected the lives and health of others. Later, family members would suggest that Maria Vanina's passing may have been directly caused by the substances that were administered to her. However, there was no supporting evidence at the time, and the case was not pursued legally. An official investigation was launched only a year later, following Djidja's death, when authorities began to connect the dots between the two incidents and started to examine the family's strange internal dynamics more closely. This earlier tragic episode had gone completely unnoticed by both law enforcement and the public until the larger, more horrifying picture came to light. It became chillingly clear that the grandmother's passing wasn't just a tragic accident, but potentially the very first consequence of a dangerous belief system that had completely blurred the lines between spiritual rhetoric and a deadly disconnection from reality. All this time, Djidja Cardoso's successful chain of beauty salons had managed to maintain a strong and positive reputation right up until the very end. Clients continued to come in for appointments. Employees worked their regular shifts, and the brand's social media accounts kept up the illusion of normalcy with a steady stream of polished photos and upbeat promotional videos. However, some of the employees were not merely observers of the family's strange behavior. They were active participants. One of the key witnesses in the case was a makeup artist named Claudiel Santos da Silva. She was later placed under house arrest with an electronic monitor, as she had a young daughter under her care. Claudielle stated to the police that she had visited Djidja's home multiple times and had witnessed her in an extremely poor condition. She described Djidja as being unable to walk, barely responsive to any conversation, and severely physically weakened. In an attempt to help, Claudielle said she would wash and style Djidja's hair, but she didn't dare to go any further, fearing that she might lose her job if she spoke up. The investigation confirmed that Cleusamar and Adomar not only oversaw the group's rituals, but also held complete control over the business itself. The staff were entirely dependent on their decisions. Schedules, payments, client assignments, and even the ability to remain employed all hinged on showing absolute loyalty to the family. Any form of disagreement or questioning came with the very real risk of being immediately dismissed. On the surface, the salons continued to operate as normal until the end of May 2024. The clients had absolutely no idea that anything was wrong. Appointments were kept, and everything appeared to be perfectly orderly. But behind the scenes, some of the salon's back rooms were occasionally being used for drug sessions involving controlled substances, organized by the very same individuals who were conducting the so-called rituals at the family home. Some staff members were invited to participate in these sessions under the guise of energy practices. While refusing to participate wasn't explicitly punished, it often led to a noticeable drop in trust from the family and fewer opportunities at work. Investigators ultimately concluded that the salons had become an integral part of a broader structure of influence and control. They weren't just financing the inner circle's lifestyle and drug habit. They had become powerful tools of control and dependency. During their interviews, police also spoke with employees who were not directly involved in the rituals. Many of them admitted that they suspected something unusual and disturbing was going on, but they didn't feel they had the right or the courage to intervene. One employee told police, "Everyone felt that it wasn't normal, but we were all afraid to ask questions." The combination of emotional pressure, unspoken rules, and the group's intense secrecy created an unbreakable system of silence. The head of the investigative team later stated that this unique setup allowed a belief-based cult to exist and thrive within a functioning, legal business. The salon had stopped being just a place for beauty services. It had become a part of a closed system where both chemical and psychological dependency were not just tolerated, but completely normalized. After Djidja Cardoso's death, her former partner Bruno Roberto tried to position himself as a concerned outsider who was caught up in the tragedy. But one small detail cast serious doubt on his claims of neutrality. A tattoo on his body that bore the words Pai Mãe Vida, the very same phrase used by the group as its symbolic motto, which also appeared on the bodies of other participants. This tattoo strongly suggested his ideological alignment with the group, regardless of whether he openly participated in their rituals or not. Regarding his passive role on the night Djidja passed away, Bruno claimed that he tried to stop her from using the drugs, but that she simply wouldn't listen to him. He insisted that he stayed by her side that night purely out of personal attachment and concern for her. However, considering Djidja's clearly impaired state, where she was in no condition to make reasonably informed decisions for herself, his stance seemed more like a transparent attempt to deflect his own responsibility for what happened. Another suspicious moment involved Djidja's car. After her death, Bruno used her vehicle, allegedly to drive to her funeral. But instead, he abandoned the car by the side of a city street. Investigators were able to trace the car's movements and questioned him about why he had left it there without any explanation. Bruno blamed a sudden mechanical issue, but within the context of the broader investigation, this incident raised serious suspicions. It may have been a clumsy attempt to dispose of potential evidence or to create a distraction for the police. Bruno's legal team maintained that he was completely unaware of the full scope of the group's activities. However, a forensic analysis of his phone revealed frequent contact with both Adamar Faras and Athos Sila, the personal trainer. Investigators confirmed that the three men were closely connected and that Bruno had visited the Cardoso home on multiple occasions, including during gatherings that were later classified as ritualistic sessions involving banned substances. One lead investigator on the case said bluntly, Bruno could not have been unaware of what was happening inside that home. His presence, while perhaps not as an organizer, was consistent and documented at critical points. Notably, he had spent the entire night at the house on the day Djidja passed away. Ultimately, Bruno was detained by police on June 7th, along with Athos Sila. Both men were charged with providing false statements to the police. Investigators had found numerous discrepancies between their testimony and the digital evidence they had collected, including text messages, geolocation data, and other content from their devices. These contradictions led to their temporary detention and further questioning. Following Djidja Cardoso's death, the case, which was originally opened by the civil police of Amazonas simply to determine her cause of death, quickly expanded. The sheer volume of evidence that was uncovered allowed investigators to expose an entire criminal operation that combined the elements of a religious cult, unlawful medical activity, and illegal substance trafficking. The arrests of the key individuals began, and the hidden structure behind the entire tragic case finally started to unravel. By the time the suspects were about to be taken into custody, they already knew they were under police surveillance. On the day that law enforcement officers arrived at the home to execute the arrest warrants, the house showed clear signs of a planned escape. There were bags packed and waiting by the door. All electronic devices had been turned off, and certain documents were missing. However, the police acted swiftly, and the suspects were detained before they could put their escape plans into motion. Among those arrested were also employees from the beauty salons, who were believed by investigators to have participated in organizing the rituals and distributing the ketamine. The charges filed against them included unlawful possession and distribution of psychoactive substances, participation in a criminal enterprise, and conducting ritualistic practices in violation of Brazilian law. A central focus of the investigation was the ketamine supply chain. Authorities discovered that the primary source of the drug led directly to a veterinary clinic in Manaus. One of the key suspects in this part of the operation was José Maximo Silva de Oliveira, the clinic's owner. His name appeared on the arrest warrant, and a few days after the police operation began, he voluntarily turned himself in. According to investigators, the clinic was not only distributing ketamine without the proper veterinary prescriptions, but was also illegally storing other controlled substances that later ended up in the hands of the members of the inner group. During a search of the clinic, documents were seized that confirmed an ongoing and established relationship between the clinic and the Cardoso family. In this way, the beauty salons had become tools for financing and supporting this underground activity. Investigators characterized this as part of a larger, well-organized system where a legitimate business, spiritual rhetoric, and the illegal trade of dangerous substances had all merged into a single, cohesive structure that controlled both money and people. Further confirmation of the scale and organization of the operation came with the arrest of 2 staff members from the same veterinary clinic. One was suspected of actively supplying the substances to the group's members, while the other was believed to have destroyed important records and concealed evidence. The operation essentially functioned on 3 distinct levels: the consumers, the Cardoso family and their close associates, the intermediaries, Athos Sila and certain salon staff, and the suppliers, the veterinary clinic. Based on this clear structure, the police formally classified the network as a criminal organization. Investigators also focused on the group's ideological front, noting that the supposed spiritual movement was much more of a convenient cover story than a genuine belief system. Thus, the Djidja Cardoso case evolved from a private family tragedy into a high-profile criminal case that exposed a large, organized network that had been operating for years under the deceptive guise of a spiritual community. According to the police, the organization had functioned for several years, operating completely unnoticed by authorities, while presenting itself to the public as a successful and socially respectable business. In June 2023, a full year before the tragic events unfolded, law enforcement in Amazonas had already begun some preliminary operations aimed at monitoring the group known as Pai Mãe Vida. However, it was only after Djidja's death that their focus shifted to the substance-related aspects of the group's activities. In December 2024, a court in Manaus delivered its final verdict. Based on the overwhelming evidence that had been presented, each of the convicted individuals received a sentence of 10 years, 11 months, and 8 days in a high-security facility, along with a hefty fine of 70,270 Brazilian reais per person, which amounted to roughly 500,000 reais in total. The sentence was handed down by Judge Gelson de Souza de Lima, who presides over the Third Court for Drug-Related Crimes in the state of Amazonas. Some of the defendants, including Bruno and another woman named Veronica, were granted the right to appeal their sentences while remaining free. However, most of the core members of the group were already in custody by the time the verdict was announced. The court completely rejected the defense's argument that the use of the substances was voluntary and simply part of a personal, spiritual search. Judge de Lima ruled that the case involved systemic exploitation, psychological manipulation, and a grotesque abuse of trust, all of it conducted under the guise of spiritual practice. This ruling marked the conclusion of the main phase of the investigation, but it also raised several lingering and troubling questions. Were there additional participants who had managed to slip under the radar? And could similar groups be operating in other cities, hiding their dangerous activities under the appearance of spiritual or self-help movements? Even after the high-profile trial concluded, the case of Djidja Cardoso remained firmly in the public spotlight. A dark cloud of public pressure and distrust lingered over anyone who had been previously associated with the family, especially individuals who were believed to have had direct ties to the group. One of the most difficult outcomes affected Claudiel Santos da Silva, the makeup artist who was among those detained during the initial wave of arrests. She had been released on supervised terms because she had a young daughter under her care. However, following her arrest, the child's father took custody and refused to return the girl, claiming that Claudiel now posed a potential risk to the child. This led to a painful and prolonged legal battle, with Claudiel fighting desperately to regain her parental rights. The case was further complicated by the unresolved allegations involving her connection to the use of prohibited substances. The public reacted to the entire saga with a mixture of shock and disgust. Online discussions across Brazil continued for months, with people expressing disbelief that a structure so closely resembling a dangerous spiritual cult could operate from inside a family home, violating both legal and basic moral boundaries for so long. In response to the public outcry, authorities in the state of Amazonas launched new inquiries into other establishments that may have been using psychoactive substances under the guise of therapy or spiritual awakening. Thank you all so much for watching and for sticking with me through this incredibly difficult story. Your support truly means the world to me, and you can help my channel continue to grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment with your thoughts, and sharing this video. Your engagement really does make all the difference. I appreciate every single one of you.